Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about, this is another edition of ALA, by the way. This is the 4th edition of Ask Elle Anything, formerly Ask Elle Anonymously, but I changed the name because it was too long. So I've gotten a few questions from people who have said, what if you couldn't detransition, hypothetically, or what should I do when I am in a situation where I would like to detransition, but I feel as though I can't because of pressure from family, from friends, or whatever it is? And I'm going to answer that today. So the first question I'm going to address is, do you think that if hypothetically you couldn't detransition, would you be miserable right now, or would you cope with it and keep living life as a man? And I think that is a super important question to answer, because there are people in that situation who feel like they realize that they made a mistake, or that they don't want to be trans anymore, that they aren't trans, or whatever it is, and they can't detransition for whatever reason. Maybe they feel like they went too far with surgeries and hormones, or that it would be too much of an upheaval of their life. They have a long-term career, like they made a name for themselves doing something. They don't want to go through the process of changing it, or whatever it is. And I can't speak specifically to that. I can't give specific advice for those situations, because that wasn't my situation. That wasn't me. And I can do my best to give some advice. So if I couldn't detransition, I think the reaction that I would have had to finding the detrans community and finding out that there are people who regret their transition and stop taking hormones and whatever it is, I think finding out that that community existed, I would have had a lot more pushback initially. I feel like where I was at mentally, I was at the point where I needed to detransition, and I just needed to get that final push. Because I had been, looking back, it had been pretty much my entire transition where I had been feeling like I wasn't really ever a man, and never gonna be satisfied with just the transition, and confused about where I fit in with my gender presentation and my clothing and whatever. So for me, it was kind of always there. I think, looking back, I've done a lot of thinking about it recently, and I think it was kind of just a matter of time for me. But letting your brain get that, get there, get to that point of being like, well, I made a mistake and I have to deal with it now, even though it changed my whole life permanently and everything. It's going to make everything harder. There are things you can do now to get past those roadblocks in your own brain, even if you feel like you're past the point of no return. If I was in that situation where I felt like I couldn't, I think that I would have just never engaged with the detransition community and just decided to keep living and believing in what I believed in, and never expanding my thoughts or my worldview on it. I think I would have probably just kept surrounding myself with the people who agreed with everything that I said, who were in the same community and in the same mindset, who were also trans or LGBT, and just continued living that life of being around people like that and never questioning or challenging my own beliefs. But if I had gotten into the detrans community, realized that I was one of the people who needed to detransition, that this really would better my life, but decided that it would be too hard or too difficult, I think I would have trouble continuing to take the hormones. Considering my situation, it's impossible to say what I would have done if I had kept going. I really did think coming up on 3 years of testosterone, I really did think that there was no way I could ever look like a girl again. There was no way I could ever live a normal life as a woman. I really did think all of that at first, because it felt like it had been such a big part of my life and so long, like, that I held this belief and this identity. It felt like an impossible task to just drop it all immediately at once and completely change the way that I looked at things. But it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, and it didn't take as long as I thought it would either. But that's speaking as someone who never had surgery, who never went the whole transition, and I don't have to reverse surgeries or anything like that. And I imagine it would be a lot harder for people who have had to do that or have to deal with that aspect of it. So, but I don't think I could have kept living as a man happily. I really don't. I think if I had gotten far enough into the detrans community to think the way that I think now about transitioning, which is that for most people it's not a legitimate brain thing, it's not a legitimate mental thing, and it's not a legitimate piece of their identity. It's not something to be corrected in the brain. It's more of a choice. For I'd say the majority of people who are transitioning right now, it's more of a choice. And it doesn't feel like it is. But if I had gotten far enough to realize that I made the choice to masculinize my body and myself and live as a man, I don't think I would have been able to continue, which is why I stopped. But getting to that point is really hard. Getting to the point where you realize that it kind of is it is a decision that you made, and it wasn't completely necessary to your survival. It was a choice. It was deliberate. You wouldn't have died without it. You wouldn't have been unable to go on. You would have figured it out. So knowing that about myself and my own situation made it impossible to go on. I did like the way that I looked, and I liked the way I was treated, and I was confident in myself, and I had a very stable mental state. But I think that most of that was just placebo from feeling like I had complete control over one aspect of my life. I could control how others saw me. I could control how I was perceived for a time. And I felt confidence based on the fact that I had control over this aspect of my physical appearance and the aspects of my mental health that I felt were previously uncontrollable. I felt that I had complete control over, which made them essentially go away, disappear. So I think that overall, once I realized that transition was not just an answer to my problems, and it was not just a solution to everything that I had been through, it would have been hard to go on. It would have been near impossible to go on living that, I think. And continue to inject myself with the hormones. I can't imagine doing that now. I can't imagine having to do that for the rest of my life. Feeling like I had to do that every week to keep being happy, to keep living, to stay normal. It's crazy. Now, it's weird, because I'm totally fine with my body now and the way that it works, and it's fine. I don't really know how I ever did that to myself. It's weird. Okay. So another person asked, they said, the only reason why I don't detransition myself is because I anticipate a huge emotional backlash from my family. And that just makes me really sad. but I can kind of understand where you're coming from with that. It is a concern, and it's a very real concern for someone who has gone through the transition and then detransition. It is such a great concern how other people are going to react. But here's what I learned. And this is not going to be applicable to every situation either. But to me, in my situation, I realized that the people who were there to support me when I was trans, eventually, who came around to my identity, who eventually accepted me and loved me for who I was, regardless of me being trans or not, they were the same people who sat by and listened to me talk about wanting to detransition and said, okay, we love you. We just love you. And I'm very lucky that I had that. I'm very lucky that I had people who accepted me to begin with. I'm lucky I didn't have a falling out with any of my family over my coming out as trans. It eventually all worked out for me in my relationships with people in my life, but this isn't going to be true for everyone. So I think the way to go about it really is figure out who you are, figure out what you want, and make your decisions based off of that and that alone. Don't transition or detransition for anyone else around you, because it's not their life that's affected by this. Like, you might really want to keep your relationships with them, and I will say, if they regardless of whether they accepted you or didn't accept you as trans, either way, they're probably going to be happy that you're detransitioning and that you've realized who you really are. If they didn't accept you as trans, they're probably going to be happy that you decided to detransition and realize that you weren't trans, or that that you don't want to keep transitioning. If they did accept you as trans, they're probably just going to be happy that you have figured out who you really are, and that it doesn't really matter whatever gender you are to them. They're just your family. So I think either way, regardless of how it ended up with your family, I think it's going to be an okay situation. But I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure. But I think anyone who genuinely loves you and wants to be in your life they might be confused. They might need you to explain it to them. They might need you to sit down with them and talk through your mindset and everything that you thought about going into this, and why you transitioned and why you detransitioned. You might need to have a lot of long conversations with them about it. I did. But they will understand if they are people who are truly loving you and truly accepting you and wanting to be in your life. I really don't think that you can make the decision to detransition based off of how other people will react, because that's just going to lead to a lot of weird, like, resentment from you. You're going to keep making a mistake that you're making just because of someone else. That doesn't make sense to me. If you genuinely think that you would be in an unsafe situation if you told your family that you were detransitioning, then maybe you should wait until you move out to tell them. But if you're already living on your own, like if you're already an independent adult making your own decisions, I don't see why it would really offend them that much. Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak to that very much because I wasn't in that situation. I was worried about what my family would think, and I dealt with the repercussions of them not really accepting that I was trans when I first came out, to getting me on hormones, to eventually deciding to stop hormones. I thought that they would be a lot more upset or concerned or like angry, maybe. I don't really know what I thought. I was scared to tell my family, but in the end, they were all just kind of like, okay, you know? They didn't really care as much as I thought they would. They just wanted me to be happy and confident in myself and love myself, and that's all they really wanted from me. So I feel like most families would be in that situation. I'm not sure what your family dynamic is like, but like I said before, I feel like either way, no matter how they felt about the trans thing, I feel like there is a definite chance that they will just accept you and love you regardless. So, all right. This has been another edition of ALA. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all of my patrons. Thank you very much. I will see you in the next video. I'm going to be making music soon. Follow my SoundCloud if you want to hear it. Goodbye.